you ready?
And welcome into the Hotty Toddy Hotline for the finale of the 2014-2015 school year. I'm executive producer Jon Rawl in with you this week, joined this week by Chad LaBorde of CRM Sports, and we'll kind of look back at the 2014-15 school year and all that was for Ole Miss this past year, and really a look across the SEC as well. And we'll also look at what's going on with Mike Bianco's baseball team, as they did punch their ticket to Hoover, but they're going to be stumbling into the SEC tournament. We'll talk about that and really what else is going on. But we want to first welcome in Chad LaBorde. Chad, welcome back to the show, sir.
I'm glad to be here. It's certainly starting to feel more and more like summer, but I'm glad to be here. It's a good thing.
And one way it feels like summer is it's the last show of Hotty Toddy Hotline, and so we'll be off the air for about 3 months, getting our juices filled and ready to go for 2015 football season, which will be here before we know it. And while we have Chad on the whole show this week, we want to talk to him a little bit about college football and his expectations for not only Hugh Freeze's team, but how he sees the rest of the Southeastern Conference playing out, and other news and notes going on as we kind of tie up the loose ends here on this final show of the year. If you want to get involved with Hotty Toddy Hotline, a couple of ways to do that. You can give us a call, or you can tweet at us, and that Twitter account is @HT Hotline, and we encourage you. It's at Hotty Toddy Hotline, actually, is what it is. And then our website is hthotline.libsyn.com. So a couple of ways for you to stay in touch through the summer months. We'll be right back to talk a little baseball after the break here on Hotty Toddy Hotline. And welcome back to the Charter Road Hospitality Studios in Oxford, Mississippi. I'm Jon Rawl, and this is Hotty Toddy Hotline, the final show of the year. We want to thank all of our great affiliates across the state of Mississippi and beyond that carry this show, as well as you, the listeners, and those who view the television edition of the show. Want to thank you for tuning in and listening and watching the show each and every week. We've had a great year. Once again, this was our 10th year of producing this show, and we'll be back here in a few months to get you going for another year of Hotty Toddy Hotline. We're joined this week by Chad LaBorde of CRM Sports, and Chad does many things on the CRM Sports Network, but one of the things he does is host the Louisiana State Roar Show, which is the show for LSU fans, our sister show for the folks down on the bayou. And Chad, we're going to talk a little bit about Ole Miss, but hey, we're going to first, I guess, congratulate you and Paul Maneri for capturing the SEC title for the regular season in college baseball.
Oh, that was something. I tell you, I was, as much as I watched LSU this year, there were times where you felt like maybe this wasn't one of the better, not just Paul Maneri teams, but LSU baseball teams, since the late 80s when things started taking off for them, back when Skip Bertman was getting the program rolling. But the more you watch them, they have their bullpen issues, or have had them. They've had, at times maybe as much as they've looked good at bat, they've had some slumps, typical maybe baseball slumps. But they're really looking good, despite what, losing the series to Kentucky, which was the only SEC series they lost this season. They won 9 of 10 SEC series. So that's pretty good. And the batting average is tops in the league. You've got an ERA that's the best in the league as well. So going into the SEC tournament, obviously this has been a favorite of Paul Maneri, really, because he's won quite a few of those. I think myself, I'm not saying they're going to necessarily go through it and win. They're capable of it. But it'll be interesting to see how far they can go, since they favored the SEC tournament a lot more than even Omaha in recent seasons.
Sure. And, of course, one reason we're talking about LSU on this week's show is because Ole Miss actually did not play their final game of the season against Texas A&M, and it was rained out. So they only played the 2 games in Oxford this past weekend, and they lost that first game on Thursday 4-0, but they came back and won a shortened 7-4 game in the first of what was supposed to be a doubleheader on Saturday. Then the second game of that doubleheader was rained out. It was some nasty weather in Oxford, some thunderstorms and such over the weekend. So that ended up, I guess, hurting them a little bit with the way the whole SEC thing went down. And we're going to talk about Ole Miss, of course, but I was a little surprised to see LSU win this thing because I really thought Vanderbilt was supposed to win this thing. And what happened on that in this final weekend of SEC play that Vanderbilt didn't win, and how in the world did LSU pull it off?
It's crazy. I too, going into this season, probably would have given the nod to Vanderbilt. But LSU, despite not having Aaron Nola this year, which was a big reason why I wouldn't have chosen LSU going in, Alex Lang has certainly proved that he can be a day one pitcher. I think being a freshman, obviously Palmineri's been handling things with kid gloves. He had him as a day two pitcher for most of the season. Switched him at one point, was considering day one, but kept him at day two when the elbow soreness started giving him trouble. He was out for one series this season towards the end of the year. And then this past weekend, they elected to move him to day three and move Austin Bain, who was doing the game three tours, move him to game two as a starter there, and then flip-flop, of course, and put Lang in game three. And that's a strategy there. It's not to demote Alex Lang or promote Austin Bain, other than it's a strategy. They feel more confident with Lang if their backs are against the wall, particularly if it's the SEC tournament or somewhere in the regionals, if that would be necessary, where they can feel confident that Lang can get them out of a jam better than even Jared Poche or anybody else in the bullpen. I do think that you have some options there in the bullpen that have come along towards the end of the season, and Hunter Newman, guys like Parker Bug. At times, I know early on they were struggling a bit trying to find their niche, but I think towards the end of the season they've gotten better. And whether or not they're going to go to Omaha remains to be seen, because you have a lot of these mid-major teams like the Dallas Baptist, like the Missouri State, that can come up and play Stony Brook as Stony Brook did to LSU about 4 years ago. And obviously, Ole Miss was able to get through the ULL craziness down in Lafayette a year ago when they went to Omaha, and that was tough. I mean, ULL wasn't a Power 5 school. They were a mid-major themselves, but they were able to get out of there and obviously go on to Omaha. So it's going to be exciting. Vanderbilt, keep in mind, they have not met LSU this season. LSU has gotten a break not having to play Vanderbilt in Florida.
I didn't realize that. And speaking of those two SEC teams, they're the ones that finished just behind LSU. LSU actually wrapped up the conference with a 21-8 mark. So somewhere along the lines, they must have had a game washed out by the weather. Is that right, LSU?
Yes, they did. It was Georgia on the road in Athens. You would have thought it would have been around here the way we were getting monsoon. We were really being troubled with rain for quite. It felt like more than a week, but you would have thought it would have been at home. But no, I think some of that rain was moving east, and I think it even reached as far as the Atlanta area and Athens. So, that was a Sunday game from what I recall.
Well, LSU was the undisputed conference champion in the regular season with what we said, a 21-8 mark, and then just behind them,
21-8.
Sir.
21-8.
Yep.
You got it, Don.
And then Vanderbilt, which could have, I guess, taken care of business this past weekend. They ended up with a 20-10 mark, so they did play their full allotment of 30 games. Florida just behind them with a 19-11 mark. Now, keep in mind they do keep different standings for an SEC East and an SEC West. So, but just looking at the overall conference, you had LSU followed by Vanderbilt, followed by Florida, wrapping up the top of the conference. In the SEC West specifically, Ole Miss finishes fourth in that bracket with LSU topping the West, followed by Texas A&M, which had a remarkable season, and then Arkansas with a 17-12 conference mark. Ole Miss 15-14 in conference play, 30-25 overall. Auburn just behind Ole Miss. They made the tournament. So did Alabama. But the Mississippi State Bulldogs joined the other Bulldogs, the Georgia Bulldogs, in sitting out the SEC tournament as they finished 13-14 respectively. No postseason play, it appears, for either one of those ball clubs in 2015. We'll take a time out here on the show. When we come back, we'll continue talking a little college baseball, and we'll switch over to the gridiron and get Chad LaBorde's take on what's going on with Hugh Freeze and all the rest of the SEC on that front. So stick around. This is Hotty Toddy Hotline from the Charter Road Hospitality Studios. And we're back here at the Hampton Inn East, just by the Oxford Conference Center, a wonderful location. Chad LaBorde of CRM Sports is joining me. Jon Rawl here on this week's show. Chad, when you're back in Oxford, keep in mind the Hampton Inn East, okay? It's a great location, and it's very easy to get around town, and you'll be you'll have a good night's sleep. So no doubt about it when you come to Oxford and stay at any of the Charter Road Hospitality Studios. We're talking college baseball with Chad, who covers the CRM Sports front from an LSU perspective, but is a college sports insider, loves college baseball, and I know on your show you routinely have certain guests come on and talk the SEC baseball and such. And so LSU wins the SEC. Ole Miss finishes fourth in the SEC West as a result of their play in college baseball. This past weekend they took one of the three games that were scheduled to be against Texas A&M. The other game went to the Aggies. The other game went to Mother Nature, as they did not play the third game, the final game of the season, because of bad weather in Oxford this past weekend. So Ole Miss heads off to the SEC tournament, where they'll face off against the Alabama Crimson Tide with an early game, Tuesday, 9:30, breakfast in Hoover, you could say, against the Crimson Tide. And congratulations to the Crimson Tide. They'll be playing in their home ballpark, at least for this year it has been, as they're getting a brand new stadium built there on the Alabama campus. And so they've been playing all their games in Hoover this year. And it was a question mark whether they would even make it to the tournament, and they did not disappoint. They were able to come through in the final weekend and end up making their way to the SEC tournament, a game against Ole Miss. Now, in this first round of the SEC baseball tournament, I think it's a one-and-done type deal, so they've got to win here in this first game of the tournament against the Alabama Crimson Tide if they're going to advance. I am right on that, right, Chad?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I was looking at the bracket as you have going into this week, and it's certainly going to be interesting to see where things lead. I think, if we get to see LSU play Vanderbilt, which is probably the two hottest teams, obviously coming out of the Southeastern Conference, I would have to think that would be a treat to see. I think the day one pitcher for Vanderbilt is certainly going to be the guy that I think is their Alex Lang this year, so to speak, but has more experience, is Carson Fulmer. And I think if we get to see a little bit of him, which obviously we will, going into the LSU game, if they should meet, I think would be, if you could see him go up against Alex Lang, I think that would be one heck of a game. But you got to see how all this plays out first. I think those are probably the two best pitchers right now in the league.
All right. So, Chad, I know that going back when Ole Miss and LSU squared off on the diamond, it's actually was an early season series down in Baton Rouge. And if I'm not mistaken, when Ole Miss won that second game in a 14-inning duel against the Tigers, wasn't that the LSU Tigers' first conference loss of the season, or maybe their first loss, period?
I want to say either their first or their second, because I know Jared Poche struggled for the first time this season against Arkansas. And obviously going back in the schedule, Ole Miss played LSU, Arkansas. I want to say it was around the same time. So it was either the first or the second one. I don't have the schedule right in front of me. But I will say this. You talk about 14 innings. That's sort of been the whole headline going into this season when LSU has pulled games out was going into extra innings. If there's a concern down the stretch, whether it's when you played Ole Miss, whether it's Arkansas, there were you could name just about every team this season that they played in conference play in a weekend series just about every week. It seems like they didn't go one game in a weekend without going to extra innings. And that part is a little scary. Now, if the bullpen gets a little bit better, maybe they can avoid that. But finishing games is very important, and trying to avoid those extra innings, because obviously there's more arms that have to go through a lot more pitches. And then that is where you kind of lose that tempo there when you're playing in a big game setting like an SEC tournament or a regional or more.
Yeah. All right, so SEC tournament, and we've seen Ole Miss, I think, win only one of those in the last 10 years or so, and that was a game against Vanderbilt about 9-10 years ago, something like that. I was actually in attendance for that, the only SEC tournament game I've ever been to in Hoover, and so that I guess maybe you could say I'm good luck for Mike Bianco, but I haven't been back and really don't want to go. Those things always seem to be the not only beginning of the summer, but the beginning of like ultra hot weather, because you can just see all the fans out there sweating their tails off. It's not exactly the greatest wind coming into that stadium, and you got to be pretty dedicated to go to the SEC tournament, especially when you have games like Ole Miss is going to have against Alabama, where they start at 9:30 in the morning. They need to put showers outside of Regents Park. It sounds like maybe they'll make a few dollars off of that concept. But again, it's going to be a tournament where Ole Miss has a long road ahead of them if they want to win that. But let's be honest, Chad, it's not the world's biggest deal to win the SEC tournament. We've seen teams like South Carolina go over there and be two and done and not even win a game. I think a couple of years ago, Ole Miss put them out of the tournament. And what did Ray Tanner's ball club, the coach of the team at that time, what did his team go and do? They won the national championship just a few weeks later in Omaha. So it's a nice thing to put up in the outfield that you won an SEC tournament. But if you gave the coaches and players a choice of maybe you don't win this thing, but because you don't win it, you get a couple extra days to heal and rest and be poised to have a long postseason, I think most every team would take that. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong. You're right. I think when you talk about conference tournaments, it's a money thing, okay? They're not going to just all of a sudden one day say, this is a bad idea, we're just going to go with a regular season champion. This is a money thing, whether it's baseball, whether it's basketball, any sport that has a tournament, it's about making money. But the long-term goal for most players is wanting to get to a national championship and go through, in the case of baseball, you're going through regional play. That's what I think really is the ultimate goal. And by doing that, you want to be rested, obviously. You may not want to be too rested, but you do want to have maybe a few extra days than what you normally have. But no player is going to go into this thinking, well, gee, how can we get out of this SEC tournament sooner rather than later? They're going to want to win it because they're competitive. That's what it's about. But if they don't, if LSU should run into a stumbling block, Ole Miss, any of these teams that may have a shot at going anywhere in the postseason, I think that it probably would suit a team maybe with even less talent, that if they don't pick up a win or two, at some point they're eliminated in a loser bracket, that they have the extra days if they have to go on the road for a regional or they host one, in order to try to gain some steam and some momentum going forward to try to get to Omaha, because that's really where you want to go. Let's be honest.
Yeah. We're visiting with Chad LaBorde of CRM Sports on this week's Hotty Toddy Hotline from the Charter Road Hospitality Studios. This week we're at the Hampton Inn East, just by the Oxford Conference Center, a wonderful location, very easy to get to, very easy to get around town if you come into Oxford during the summer, or if you're coming in to maybe attend an orientation. If you have a youngster looking at going to school at the university, this is a great place for you to consider, and we'll tell you more about how you can get a booking here or any of the other Charter Road hospitality options as we roll on this week's show. We're visiting with Chad, talking a little college baseball. Chad, I think it's safe to say while the Tigers of LSU and Vanderbilt, it looks like, and maybe Florida are going to be punching their tickets to host a regional, and if they win that, a super regional, Mike Bianco's ball club is going to be packing their bags. They're not going to be playing in Oxford in the postseason. That's not all bad. We saw what they did, as you mentioned earlier, down in Lafayette last year, winning that super regional. But it is a much tougher road to advance in postseason when you're not playing in the friendly confines.
Yeah, anytime you have to go on the road, it makes it tough. I do think that if you're playing, let's say not in a Lafayette or a Baton Rouge environment where it's usually pretty rowdy, if they can go somewhere where, yeah, you're going to have some opposing team fans there making some noise, but maybe not getting quite as lit up, if you know what I mean. I think it certainly can help maybe get away, in the case of Ole Miss, from maybe being, going through some rough spots and rough times at home. You try to put a positive spin on it just to have a getaway trip to where they can really just lay it all out there, school's out, they're away from campus, make it like not a fun trip so much, but a business trip where they can relax and maybe actually get into the game and make a couple of surprise wins down the stretch. And then, as I stated earlier, they did it in Lafayette. You think about these mid-majors, if they had to go to, and I don't have, the potential brackets here, but if they were able to go to a mid-major school and had to play there, the fan bases there are not nearly as large, to me, they could be, they get on a roll here. They could be looking at a potential, upset or two that could lead them, maybe in picking up some wins that they didn't think they could. It'll be interesting to see because there's always a surprise or two in the mix, it seems like, every year with these regionals. And usually we saw it last year with Kennesaw State. We saw it with College of Charleston. We saw it with ULL up until they faced Ole Miss. Even though they had a really good season, they were still from the Sun Belt. So you're always going to see a surprise or two, and Ole Miss could be a part of that as they were when they knocked off ULL a year ago.
Yep. All right, Chad, I want to tell you about some SEC honors coming in for Ole Miss, and then I want to talk to you what fans really want to hear, and that's what in the world happened in Starkville this year. But first, Ole Miss baseball senior Sykes Orvis was named SEC Co-Player of the Week. And the conference announced this on Sunday. The first baseman and team co-captain earned the accolade for the first time in his career after an impressive individual showing on the road at Arkansas State, and then helping Ole Miss to a victory over number 6 Texas A&M on Saturday. The Orvis Award is the fourth. He's the fourth Rebel to earn this award from the SEC this season, and second in as many weeks. Last week, Wyatt Short earned SEC Co-Pitcher of the Week, and Scott Weathersby was named SEC Co-Pitcher of the Week back on April 13th. Will Golson was the Freshman of the Week on March 23rd. Orvis from Orlando, Florida, hit 400 in 3 games last week and registered 9 RBIs and a slugging percentage of 1.1. So a great job by him. I'm not sure if he's sporting the beard or not this week. I know a lot of the ladies like his Orvis beard, but I know he did trim it up a little bit. So anyway, congratulations to Sykes Orvis, and another great honor for Ole Miss. And just looking at the last couple of days, they were a team on the bubble of even making the NCAA, and it looks like they've not only punched their ticket to that, but they seem to be trending upward, and that's exactly what you want to have happen at the end of the season. All right, Chad, before we put the baseball talk onto the back burner on this week's Hotty Toddy Hotline, we talked earlier about how 2 teams are not going to even make it to Hoover, and that's Georgia and Mississippi State. And John Cohen's team played for the national championship just 2 years ago, and here they are this year, not even probably going to any kind of postseason. What is your opinion of what happened in Starkville this year?
Oh, that was something that really surprised me. I know both State and Ole Miss were losing some players after last season, and I didn't expect things to probably be quite as bad for Ole Miss. But really, Mississippi State not even making it to Hoover, that's even worse. I mean, that really surprised me. When you consider the likes of Wes Ray, who's obviously, to me, the face of Mississippi State. He's certainly got the height to be one of the best Bulldogs right there on that ball club. He's one of the guys that I always think of going back to that time when they played UCLA for the national title, and then, of course, a year ago. But this season, I'm surprised that they weren't even able to be as competitive as Ole Miss has been with a similar record. I think Mississippi State not going to Hoover is more of a surprise than Georgia out of the 2 that's not making.
And Mississippi State finished dead last in the SEC with an 8-22 conference mark. They were 24-30 overall. Just a real collapse down there at Dudy Noble this past year. I'm not sure what kind of changes might happen there, but a real shocker because, look, in Mississippi, we like to pride ourselves here about success. I mean, Southern Miss has been to the College World Series in the last decade. Ole Miss has been there. Mississippi State played for a national championship. They're a perennial power, you could say, in college baseball, but, boy, they've dropped off the radar this year. And Ole Miss was just there 2 or 3 years ago. I think they had a bad year, and they rebounded from that. So we'll see what happens with the Bullies, but tough season there for them. We'll take a break. We are going to talk a little college football when we come back on the other side of this commercial timeout as we continue on with more Hotty Toddy Hotline from the Hampton Inn East. And welcome back into the Hampton Inn East in Oxford, Mississippi. This is Hotty Toddy Hotline from the Charter Road Hospitality Studios. Jon Rawl with Chad LaBorde this week of CRM Sports. We're talking Ole Miss sports and a little SEC too. And Chad, I don't know about you, but a lot of folks have a counter counting down to that first weekend in September. And for Ole Miss, it's UT Martin coming to Vaught-Hemingway Stadium. And are you already counting down the minutes and hours until college football kicks off?
I am and I'm not. I'm looking forward to it, though. No, I'm always looking forward to it. There's no question. I think right now, with the baseball team being where they are for LSU, obviously that's what I've been more focused on. And still with football, obviously, as I'm sure with Ole Miss right now, there's a lot of fundraising going on at this time of year throughout each respective state. And you could say that about all the schools, really, throughout the Southeastern Conference and the entire country. So, yeah, I am looking forward to it, no question. I guess why I'm saying yes and no is, in the case of LSU, is do I really want to see a quarterback mess again that I saw last season? You know, it was almost great when the bowl season was over for LSU because I didn't have to look at that anymore. But now I don't want to say, and I don't want to be necessarily pessimistic about it turning out to be the same result as a year ago. But I'm still skeptic until you get to playing Mississippi State in week 2 as to what really you're looking at. And look, I know they play McNeese like many schools do week 1 with the Rent-A-Wins, but you can kind of tell, even with a Rent-A-Win, and sometimes it's harder than others, but you can tell if a team is really going to possibly contend for something when you play those Rent-A-Wins in September. You know, if you got 2 right away or the first game only, you can tell. It's something about the way a team performs, and maybe I read a lot into it, but you know, after Anthony Jennings threw more interceptions against New Mexico State than touchdown passes, I think it's easy to tell.
Yeah.
At least, you know.
If you're tuning in, Chad is the host of the Louisiana State Roar program, which is our sister show here on Hotty Toddy Hotline. It's an LSU-centric show. He does a great job with that. We've asked him to come aboard here on this week's show of Hotty Toddy Hotline because he keeps up with not only LSU but all things SEC. And of course, LSU, they kind of get a little bit of a breather, as you said, facing off against the Cowboys in the first week. Not Dallas, but the guys from Lake Charles. But, Chad, I know a couple of years ago LSU started the season against Wisconsin, and that's exactly what Alabama's going to do this year. They face off, I believe, in Jerry's world against the Badgers to start the season. What do you think of that matchup?
It would be nice if Melvin Gordon was playing because I'd like to see how he would do against that Tide defense. I mean, we saw him last year run against the LSU defense, and he made him like Swiss cheese. I mean, the guy was phenomenal. The best guy, I thought, in the country in terms of attitude off the field and attitude on the field. He got hurt. He pulled a muscle, I believe, or a quad. I think it was a quad. And he couldn't play in the second half of the LSU game. And if he would have, Wisconsin probably wins that game. Mm-hmm. A lot of experts feel, and I do too.
They had the control of that game. I mean, LSU really had to fight valiantly to come back and win that one.
Right, and the thing about the Badgers, look, Alabama, because it's Alabama, you think, well, they'll probably win the game. It's going to be tough. You know, obviously they're getting a situation where a new coach in Paul Chris is having a coach against the Tide with his ball club first game in Madison. Gee, you know, that's going to be a big deal for him. And he's got some players returning, no question about it. It'll be interesting to see if they're able to compete for 4 quarters and make it a close game going, you know, in the middle of the 4th quarter if we're looking at a game that we really can't decide yet. If that's the case, you know, Alabama probably will come out on the winning end if I had to guess. But Alabama's got a new quarterback. You know, Alabama's got some pieces that they have to fill that maybe Wisconsin has, maybe a little different in a sense because obviously the quarterback situation in Alabama with Jacob Coker is going to be new. They're going to be making some, it's not quarterback rotations. They're going to have to decide on a starter in Wisconsin, especially with a new coach. And, you know, obviously the running game for Alabama will be a strength as it will be for Wisconsin. So they're going to grind it out a little bit here. Could be a very close game. Alabama gets the nod, I think, but I don't think it's going to be a blowout. It could be as good as it was against LSU for Wisconsin. It could be the same type of game, maybe a different result for them, but it's going to be a close game with Alabama, I think. I'd be surprised if Alabama would have run away with it.
All right, help an old guy out here, Chad. I know that Wisconsin's coach, Brett Bielema, left for Arkansas 2 years ago now, something like that. Then they had a coach for, 2 seasons? And he left.
Yeah,
he left Wisconsin to go where, Nebraska?
Gary Anderson left to go to it was Oregon State because now this is how the coaching dominoes fall here. You might need a program for this.
All right.
You had Mike Riley, obviously Bo Pelini was out at Nebraska. Mike Riley taking the Nebraska job. So he leaves Oregon State to go to Nebraska. So obviously the Beavers have a job opening. So Gary Anderson, who obviously was at Utah State before Wisconsin, was very familiar with the West Coast in recruiting. He ran a spread offense over there, unlike what Bielema had going, the ground and pound and pro-style offense that he had going in Madison. So he had to kind of shuffle the deck there and play according to his talent, something that I thought Rich Rodriguez never did at Michigan, but he did at Wisconsin, Gary Anderson. And I think he felt like he could go to Oregon State and maybe be more familiarized again as he was before at Utah State with the recruiting landscape on the West Coast and get more of a spread attack that he would like to have out there in Corvallis. So now you got the Wisconsin job open, and they go grab Paul Chryst from Pitt, who obviously coached under Brett Bielema, played for the Badgers. He's an alum. So they thought about grabbing him before, but he had just taken the Pitt job, and that's how Gary Anderson came into the fold when Brett Bielema left. So they finally get Chryst over as the head coach not too long after that. Boy, I tell you, what a coaching carousel it's been. And then, of course, Pitt, Pat Narduzzi got the Pitt job, who was on the D coordinator on Mark D'Antonio's staff at Michigan State. So it's been a whirlwind of coaches when you consider Madison and Corvallis, at least.
Yeah. Well, I knew it was a little bit confusing, and let's face it, a lot of folks, including myself, kind of have the SEC blinders on and don't really pay that much attention to what goes on beyond the Southeastern Conference. And I knew there had been some changes, but I'm glad you kind of gave us your epistle of what in the world's been going on north of the Mason-Dixon, because it's rather confusing. And there is one caveat to that, and that is the part of the way this whole thing got started was Bielema leaving Wisconsin to come to Fayetteville, and the Arkansas Razorbacks are poised to have a good season. We'll talk about that and the rest of what we see happening in 2015 when we come back from the break. You're listening and watching Hotty Toddy Hotline. Stay with us. And welcome back to the Hampton Inn East here on Hotty Toddy Hotline. Hampton Inn East, you can give them a call anytime and book your next reservation, 662-234-5565. An unbelievably nice property. I've had family members come and stay here many times. Great staff, delicious breakfast in the morning. Check it out, 662-234-5565. And they also have sister properties here for you to encourage you to check those out as well. Just across the parking lot here is the Town Place Suites by Marriott. Also, they have the Hampton Inn West, which is just off of Jackson Avenue at 110 Heritage Drive. Their number is 662-232-2442. And, of course, the Holiday Inn Express in Oxford is another Charter Road Hospitality property. So when you come to Oxford, keep in mind Charter Road Hospitality. Jon Rawl with Chad LaBorde, CRM Sports. We're talking SEC football here on this final show of 2015. We just can't wait for the kickoff of college football season. So when we get back on the air at the end of August, early September, whenever you may pick up our show on your local affiliate, it'll be time to talk Ole Miss UT Martin that week. So we're going to go ahead and kind of jump ahead a couple months on this show and glance around what we see happening that first couple of days of SEC football. I mentioned going into the break, Arkansas. That's a team that really came on strong at the end of 2014. Ole Miss knows that firsthand because they were demolished by Arkansas out in Fayetteville toward the end of the season. And Arkansas went on to reel off an impressive win against Texas in the bowl there in Houston, Texas. Brett Bielema, Chad LaBorde, has done a good job, it looks like, getting his team back to bowl eligibility, and it's a team some people are predicting to have a very good 2015. Your thoughts on the Hogs?
They're not going to win the SEC West, but they can make the decision of who does.
Okay.
I think they could make enough noise. Jonathan Williams and Alex Collins back at running back. That's the one. One had close to 1,200 yards, 1,190 to be exact. The other had exactly 1,100 yards, and I'm thinking it's in the order of Williams and Collins. But it doesn't matter because either way, you're going to get the 1-2 punch of these guys. They are certainly tremendous backs. They certainly reminded you a lot of those Wisconsin running backs that Bielema coached, and even going back to the Barry Alvarez days when he coached under him up in Madison. And that's what he got, and that's what he wants to keep churning at Arkansas, is that same similar style of offense as far as getting you getting at to weakening your line in the trenches. I think the big question for them is at quarterback, the improvement of Brandon Allen. I also think the defense, which was pretty good, especially the second half of the season, but really throughout the year got better and better. If they can step up and be just as good from the start, if not better, they can make some noise. I think it's an Auburn-Alabama division with Arkansas deciding who wins the thing. And I think those are the three teams, but Arkansas is a wild card in that bunch.
All right. Well, folks on this show want to know your thoughts on Ole Miss in 2015. And looking at the schedule, I can see this team easily achieving what they did in 2014. But at the same time, Chad, I can see this team being the complete opposite and being more like 4-8 or something like that, because the wheels can easily come off if things don't go their way.
Ole Miss is going to have another good year at defense, and I think defense is what I like a lot. I'm really big on defense, and if they're able to accomplish what they did a year ago on defense, I would not worry about them going 4-8. It's going to be a lot better than that. I think Ole Miss, what they have to figure out is the quarterback situation, and can Chad Kelly not lose his cool off the field to keep focus on the field and stay out of trouble. If Hugh Freeze, I know, has done everything possible to try to keep him straight. Kid's got a lot of talent. He's got Jim Kelly in his genes. He's not a Kelly for nothing, that's for sure. And I think if he's able to keep him straight, I think they could certainly be a team that could play the role that Arkansas is playing, maybe better, because I think if you could get the best out of Kelly, it could be better than Brandon Allen. But a lot of it's going to be determined, ironically, as I mentioned about LSU, a lot of it for Ole Miss is going to be determined by the quarterback position. A running back position, I don't think they have the stable that maybe an LSU or an Alabama or an Arkansas has. But I do think defensively they could stand up with the best in the country again, as long as they don't catch any injury bugs. And when you got players like Laquan Treadwell, if he gets the ball from Chad Kelly, it cause a lot of damage, particularly if we get the Laquan Treadwell that we saw before the Auburn game, before the injury. If he can come back to what he was before, the talent that they recruited, I tell you what, you could be looking at a 10-win season easily, and you never know where that can lead beyond that.
Well, my thoughts about the complete opposite of a great season is just purely based on the schedule. I mean, when you play in the SEC West, you're going to have some formidable opponents, and when you have to go to Bryant-Denny, you have to go to Auburn, you got to play LSU and Arkansas at home, both very improved teams, and I just know it's going to be tough to win one or even both of those games. This is a part of the life of playing in the SEC. The good news for Ole Miss, the word of the day here on the show that you helped educate us on, is rent a win. And luckily for Ole Miss, they're going to be able to rent a win against the UT Martin Skyhawks on September 5th, and they'll follow that up with a supposed rent a win against Fresno State on September 12th. Remember, Fresno State was the only team only FBS team Ole Miss beat in 2011. I think I'm right on that, when they went out and won in Fresno. That was the only FBS team they won when they had that rather dismal 2-10 season. So that's what the Ole Miss schedule is shaping up to be in 2015. And Chad LaBorde, you're saying 10-2 is a real possibility?
I think it could be, as long as they can get good quarterback play with Chad Kelly. If Chad Kelly has turned things around off the field and has become really invested in the family at Ole Miss in terms of the club, and Hugh Freeze has them on the straight and narrow, I think, they could get 9 or 10 wins. I think that's very possible. I think the thing that you have to be concerned about is that there is some issues with Chad Kelly, and you got to change quarterbacks, and something happens for whatever reason. That's where the continuity of the team and whether or not that next guy up is going to be effective. Because obviously with Bo Wallace leaving, there's a big question mark there, even as far as Chad Kelly's concerned, although there's a lot of promise bringing him in. But it's under circumstances that were because of attitude off the field at Clemson that you don't want translating here in Oxford. So I think that's going to be a lot determined. Also, if that defense can stay healthy, I mean, they've got some depth on that defense. I mean, the defense is very impressive. I mean, it was impressive to see what LSU did to that defense on that last drive of that game in Baton Rouge a year ago. And that was a heck of a defense that Ole Miss put out there. I mean, that wasn't your average defense that you talk about just a few short years ago when they last played Fresno State out there in the Valley. I mean, this is a much better, much improved defense that you could tell that the chips that Hugh Freeze acquired in recruiting, these blue chippers, no pun intended, certainly have gone on to greater heights a year ago, and I think can do the same this year, unlike their arch rival down the road in Starkville.
Yep. Well, the arch rival's actually in Baton Rouge, Chad. Just want to point that out. Speaking of the Bayou Bengals, Ole Miss and LSU face off at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium this year, the next to last game of the year. You know, last year I think the game was moved way up into October, which historically that's where that game was always located, and because of the scheduling, it's back now as late November. And this game's always fun, and it's always a tough game, Chad. But this year, it marks the return of Coach Ed Orgeron to Vaught-Hemingway Stadium.
Ooh, yeah, that's going to be a lot to digest there. You know, the one thing I will say about Coach O, if he would have maybe done some things a little differently, like we talked about on an episode of College Game Day, when he had to, when he was filling in as the interim back in 2013, if he would have probably done some things differently, he certainly recruited the players. He set things up pretty good for Houston Nutt right away, I think. Much better recruiter than Nutt. And he probably could have did a lot better. He obviously, never being a coordinator, that's what really struck me when Ole Miss made that hire. You're hiring a guy that was never a coordinator. He was a line coach and recruiting coordinator, but not a defensive or offensive coordinator. And I think usually when coaches that have never been head coaches before get a job, particularly in the SEC, they usually have at least been some kind of coordinator on either side of the ball. And that was the part that I think surprised me with that hire. And you wondered if Ed Orgeron was really ready at that time, and obviously he wasn't.
No, and that's not Orgeron's fault. That falls on Robert Kayat, the then chancellor of the university, for making that decision, because he fired David Cutcliffe and said, we're going to go get a proven head coach. He and Pete Boone said that, and they got a guy who had never been a coordinator, and it was learning on the job, and that's not what you do in the SEC. Now, he started to do better, but still they canned him, probably rightfully so, but this is not a proving ground here. You go get proven people, and that's exactly what they said they would do, but they didn't. But we found out, not just Ole Miss, we've seen plenty of other schools from Tennessee to you name it, who've had coaching changes in last decade or so. It's not easy finding a good coach, and so Ole Miss is really amongst many schools who've had a real challenge when they've made a coaching change. We'll call timeout and come back and wrap up this week's show for our final segment of the final show of 2014-15. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the final segment of the final Hotty Toddy Hotline of this school year. And we want to thank you for listening and watching our show all about Ole Miss from the Charter Road Hospitality Studios. Just a fantastic place and a fantastic partner for us this year. And we look forward to being back with you. We're going to be off the air for about 3 months and come back just before the UT Martin game with the return of Hotty Toddy Hotline. So we're going to have plenty of stuff in the fall to get to you, and also want to talk a little bit. Chad LaBorde is our special guest this week. Chad, I know you are an expert on this category. It's kind of like playing Jeopardy. You want to reach up there and pick the category here?
Well, one of the categories is college football, of course.
No, can't talk about that. We've maxed that. I'm going to be the Alex Trebek. The category is tennis, men's tennis. I know you're an expert on that, right?
Well, usually it's usually a round ball, but it's usually a little smaller than a tennis ball.
All right. Well, we want to just give a shout-out to the Ole Miss men's tennis team as they finished with one of the top 10 attendance teams in all of college tennis this year, ranked number 9 overall, 5th in average attendance. This year they played in front of 3,246 fans, and nearly 1,000 came out to support the Ole Miss Rebels in their regular season finale against Tennessee and Kentucky. This team is headed to the NCAAs. We wish them all the best. Nick Schultz is the lead tennis player, it appears, on the team this year, so wish them well. Maybe they'll bring back some type of award for Ole Miss on that front. So, Chad, that's the tennis front. We've covered the football front. We've covered the baseball front. I'm not going to stump you on any more Jeopardy questions here this week. Thank you for being a part of our show, not only today, but I know you've been on many times throughout this spring and given us your thoughts on SEC and Ole Miss. Hopefully you've got big summer plans.
I do. It's going to be sitting back and laying on the hammock somewhere with a fan on. I mean, obviously, because it's so hot down here that we're not going to get many days where we've had some of these cool breezes down here. It's going to get very hot and humid, if not already, pretty soon. And you're starting to feel a little bit, some semblance of it really in the last few days. But I think I'm just going to be enjoying my time and obviously keeping an eye on the College World Series, at least in the short term here early.
And you just might see Mike Bianco get his team back out there if things go their way in the postseason. Again, this week, the SEC baseball tournament over in Hoover, and then Ole Miss will go to the NCAA tournament. We're not sure where, but you can rest assured they're going to be packing their bags and going somewhere for not only a regional, but if they win that, to a super regional as well. But good news is they're in it, while some other teams are not in any kind of postseason. So that's something to be happy about if you're an Ole Miss fan. All right, Chad, have a great summer. For you, our listeners, and our viewers of Hotty Toddy Hotline, thank y'all so much for being a part of our exciting show. And for 10 years of being on the air with you, we've had a great time and looking forward to another 10 years. This is Hotty Toddy Hotline. Jon Rawl signing off from the Charter Road Hospitality Studios this week at Hampton Inn East. We'll see you back here in late August. Until that time, have a great summer and Hotty Toddy.